welcome in. It's another brand new edition of the 901 Soccer Podcast. I'm your host, Lawrence Dockery. We have a very special guest on the program with us today. We're joined by United States men's national team legend Tab Ramos. Tab played for the U.S. at 3 World Cups, was an assistant coach at a U.S. World Cup, managed the U.S. U20 national team for a number of years, managed in MLS with the Houston Dynamo, and managed in the USL Championship against 901 FC with Hartford Athletic. Tab, thank you so much for coming on. How are you doing tonight?
Thank you. Very good. Thank you.
So really, we'll just get right into it here. One of the reasons that we're able to do this is that after the departure of Memphis 901 FC, you were one of the first people that reached out to me, which I did appreciate. And so I guess one of the things is it took the 901 FC news when it was announced that they had lost their franchise rights and they were being transferred to Santa Barbara, California. It took everybody here in Memphis by surprise. Was that something that took you by surprise? Were you kind of in the same boat as the rest of us? Or was it something that was like you kind of saw the writing on the wall?
Yeah, no, I don't necessarily have an exact opinion on that because I didn't know there were issues there in the first place. So I guess I could say I was surprised likely, but the only reason I reached out to you is because, I'm not really big on social media. I only have, X and I follow not a lot of people. But I did follow you because you had some passionate opinions about your team, and you cared about, obviously Memphis and the team there. And when I saw that the team was going away, it just, I come from a generation of players that kind of helped to develop the game. And we lived through those things. We lived through teams disappearing constantly. And it's kind of like, it was kind of one of those punches in the stomach that I had before, so it was more me reaching out to you was more about just that bad feeling of, here comes another city that was trying to get through this thing. And I know that the attendance of the team was going down and all that stuff, but it doesn't matter. Like, why can't we in 2024 at the time not find someone to save the team and keep it in the city? And, I feel like we're at a time when that sort of thing needs to happen. So my only reason for reaching out was I felt bad. It's not that I was surprised or I was more disappointed than anything else.
And that, I guess it makes sense that, because like I said, nobody here saw this coming. I had been on the record a number of times in that because there was this sort of behind the scenes official, but sort of unofficial. No one was sure it was real or not. This stadium mandate from the USL Championship that said by 2026, you're in your own stadium or else. And nominally, the reason given that 901 FC has been moved to Santa Barbara is the inability to secure a stadium. And there's a lot of more local and more, there's a lot of more local reasons for that, which I don't need to beat that horse to death again. But, is that something, do we expect more teams in the league to kind of have to go through the same thing because of a lack of a stadium deal? Or is that something that was just internet rumor mill?
Well, I mean, that's a question that likely will take somebody a lot smarter than me to answer. I do know that, soccer in general, and in particular in the lower leagues, it's hard to come up with the numbers to support the team just purely on attendance or purely on game day revenue. TV contracts, unfortunately, are not there at the level that the teams need them. And so some sort of land deal needs to be had in order for a team to survive. And unfortunately, we're at that point now where, we could speak about MLS too, because MLS has those same issues at a much, with much bigger numbers, because at the end of the day, the owners have to come in and they need land, they need a stadium, they need some physical assets, I think, to make it work. And it's just unfortunate that in Memphis it couldn't happen, because I think even though the attendance had gone down, had they been able to secure some land and a stadium, I truly feel that the fans would have been there.
So As somebody who has worked in the USL Championship with Hartford, what was kind of the perception of Memphis 901 FC from the outside? We're here in Memphis in our little bubble, and we have our opinions about the way that the team was run and decisions that were made or not made and that sort of thing. But what was, as on the outside within the league, what was the perception of 901 FC? Was it both in terms of how difficult are they to play against on the field? And then, as far as did they have any kind of reputation one way or the other of how they did things off the field?
No, actually, as a coach, you're so focused on the team you play next week, that it's very difficult to think about anything else. So obviously at that point, I'm not paying attention as to how a franchise is doing or how many fans are going where. You only get to do that maybe in the off season. So my only perception I can tell you about Memphis was that there was always good players there. You look at the list of players, and year after year, they always have one or two players that you always wonder, well, how come they're not in MLS? Because they're that caliber. And so I thought that was really nice to see that they always extended themselves to at least have every year on the roster a couple of players that potentially could be playing at a higher level. So I thought that's my perception was that Memphis was always a good team.
Did you ever come to Memphis, or when you were with Hartford, did 901 FC only go there?
Yeah, I didn't get a chance to go to Memphis.
Okay. And then, if memory serves, I think did Niall Logue play for you at Hartford, or were you already gone from Hartford at that time?
Who?
Niall Logue.
Oh, Logue, yeah, played for me. I think we brought him directly from there.
That's. I knew he went to Hartford.
Yeah.
Yeah,
we needed a left-footed center back, and we needed to change a little bit of the dynamic of the locker room, and he was the right type of person for that. I actually really like Niall. Things didn't work out well for him in Hartford, but they don't work out well in Hartford for a lot of people. So, but having said that, I mean, I love Niall. He was a great person to have around. He was a hard worker and a player that I would have on my team anytime.
Well, and you mentioned it not working out well for him there. I feel like in the 6 years that 901 FC here was here, I think that's just part of the nature of the league, right? With such high roster turnover, you're not able to keep guys for more than a year or two. And unless you're a team like Louisville City, where you can keep your core guys there for year over year over year. If everybody in the USL Championship was like Louisville City, I think we'd have a very, very strong second division. But no, is that something that maybe down the line that can be, I don't know if looked at is the right word, or examined, or is that just the way it's going to have to be in the league for the time being? Just guys in a number of cities for very short periods of time.
Yeah, I mean, I still think that the league is going through growing pains, and I think USL is really positioning itself. If you look at the numbers of the USL Championship game, the USL Championship game, and you look at the MLS Championship game, the numbers are not that far off for a league that in terms of dollar value there's such a tremendous difference. So, but I do feel like the USL is finding itself in a nice little spot in the American market, and it may take another 4 or 5 years before it really settles in. But I think USL has a real opportunity with all of the teams coming in and with potential teams that you hear about. They have a real opportunity to potentially run their own first and second division, with promotion relegation. So I like where USL is. I think, teams at the moment, I don't, on the financial side, it's really difficult for them. But I think for the teams and the franchises that are able to hang in there, I think there might be a good future there.
And do you think that, having never been here, this may be a little bit tougher of a question to answer, but do you think that maybe eventually there could be professional soccer back in Memphis someday?
Well, there used to be professional soccer there years and years ago. So, I mean, I'm old enough to to remember that there was. So yeah, I do. I see that. Because you see smaller cities that are coming along now, whether it's, Lexington, or, there's newer cities coming up everywhere that want to have, Naples, Florida is getting a team in. There's a lot of new places coming in. I really do see that Memphis could potentially have a team down the road. And I think that team is likely going to be it's likely only going to happen with the stadium deal being put together. And I wouldn't say that couldn't happen, because there's a lot of people that want to invest in soccer nowadays. And so it just really takes one ownership group that believes in the city, and believes in that there's enough people with the interest to go to the games. But Memphis is a great city. I don't see why it couldn't happen. As a matter of fact, I certainly wouldn't bet against it.
Oh, well, I like the sound of that, and I'm sure
Yeah.
the viewers of the channel like that too.
Yeah.
So on a less depressing topics, you played for the U.S. men's national team for a very long time. You were one of the guys to get the U.S. back to the World Cup for the first time in something like 50 years. I did enjoy reading the book in which you were prominently featured, New Kids at the World Cup. That was a very enjoyable read. The U.S. men's national team had a rough 2024. There's no two ways about that. But it feels like with the new coaching hire of Mauricio Pochettino and players playing in the top leagues in Europe, it feels like there might be a little bit more optimism now than there was 6 months ago. Am I crazy for thinking that, or are you feeling the same thing?
No. I mean, there's no question. I think we have a high level, high quality, established, accomplished coach, and so because of that, I think there's no question that we our options going into 2026 have and the opportunities, I think, are going to be better. There's no question about that. So one of the things that I've said about Mauricio Pochettino is because of the level he's been at. I think, the moment he walked into that locker room, this becomes like the real deal. Now it's like you either, you have to put up or you're going to be out, and I think the players probably feel that. They probably feel that he doesn't owe anyone anything, and that he's just there to win games at the end of the day, and to pick whoever he feels is going to, whatever players he feels allow him to win the most games and do the best he can. And because of that, there's no secrets there. If you do well, you're going to play, and if you don't, you're not. And I think that was the fresh start that we needed at this point, in particular because there's only 18 months to the World Cup.
Mm-hmm. And that's something that time was. It feels like, as somebody who's excited and ready for the World Cup to be here, it feels like it's so far away. But I can imagine if you're in charge of molding a national team to get them ready to compete well at a home World Cup, that doesn't feel like very long at all, especially in the international game. But he's been in charge for 6 games and he's won 5 of them. I don't see how up to this point it could really have gone much better. Perhaps maybe result in that one friendly loss against Mexico aside. But at this most recent January camp, there's always been a lot of, especially lately, there's been a lot of debate and discussion about the necessity of the January camp, I guess you could say. But I'm of the opinion that it's crucial this year and next year simply because we're hosting a home World Cup, and the more opportunities, the better. And you get 2 wins out of 2 games in fairly convincing fashion. How impressed were you with a young group of players at this year's January camp?
Yeah, I mean, I would have a couple comments about what you just said. One is, he's won 5 out of 6 games, but I think it's the way he's won the games that I think has impressed more, because the intensity of the players has been a lot different than it was before. And I think that's what we're looking for. At the end of the day, we're not Brazil, and we do have good players, but at the end of the day, we're Americans, and we want to see our team, if anything, always play hard. That has to be the bottom denominator, the common denominator. And we didn't have that for a while. And I think now we have that back. And I think most American fans will be happy with that as a start. And then the better we play, the better. But I think, to add to what you just said, the team is also playing well. and so that adds to what
Oh
we
yeah.
can hope for. And then the January camp, I agree with you that it was necessary this year, necessary next year. But I'm a big fan of the January camp anyway. You know, we have great players overseas. As long as the federation can afford to have the camps, I think we should always have them, because it could never hurt to get to see more and more players, and to widen that net of players that you have available for the national team.
Well, speaking of widening the net of that net of players, is there anybody that kind of jumped off the field at you these last two games? For me, it was Patrick Ajimang. I thought he, 2 goals in 2 games, and that last finish in that game against Costa Rica was something. But is there, anybody that just jumped off the page at you, so to speak?
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with you on that, but I would add that because of where we are with our national team and because we do have great players overseas, and no one can deny that our players are great players. That you're looking maybe for something a little bit different. So if I'm looking for something a little bit different, I sort of like the mentality of Diego Luna, and what
Oh yeah.
he was, I mean, he was like a warrior out there. And that's the guy that I want, even if it's on the bench. Like, I want to have him there because I know he's going to come in and die for the team. Like, it's nice for a coach to know that. So it was nice to see. And then, and then there was some real quality. I like McGlynn's quality in the middle of the field. I'd like for him, and I know him a little bit, but I'd like for him to get more into the box if he can. But he has a lot of finesse. He has a lot of quality. I think Gutierrez has a lot of quality, and I really like him as well. And as I said in an earlier interview, I was happy to see that Zach Steffen did so well. And I know he didn't have a lot to do, but Zach Steffen was far and away the best goalkeeper candidate that we had. I was with the national teams for 10 years, almost, 8 years. He was the best candidate, and I think it's not too late at his age. He'll turn 30 this year, to have a good 4, 5, 6 years in which he can, that I feel that position is wide open, and I think he can win it. I just hope he takes the opportunity.
I'm glad that you mentioned Diego Luna, because there was a lot of consternation about his omission from the roster at the Olympics this past summer. So getting to see him, I thought was good. But with the broken nose, what it reminded me of, and this harkens back to what you had mentioned earlier about, we've got American players that always played really hard, even though they might not have been the most skilled or whatever you want to call it.
Right.
It took me back to Clint Dempsey at the World Cup in 2014. I don't remember. I want to say it was the Ghana game where he got kicked in the face and had a broken nose. But I just when that happened to Diego Luna, that's what it took me back to. And I mean, if there's anybody since I've been watching this team that kind of embodies the going to go out there and die for the team, I would say it was Clint Dempsey.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, I obviously know Clint really well, and he is that guy. He's the no nonsense. He wants to win regardless of what's going on. He'll do whatever it takes. And yeah, you're right. Diego showed a little bit of that, and hopefully he gets some more opportunities. It's not easy. At the end of the day, it's not easy because the players in front of him are really good players. But hopefully he gets some more chances.
And so one of the things that I wanted to kind of touch on is I'm really trying to, I guess, bang the drum for the next 18 months is, we do have a home World Cup here in the United States. And the World Cup kind of sells itself, right? It's like you have to live under a rock for all of eternity to not know about the World Cup. And so, yes, it's going to be here and it's going to be awesome. I don't think anybody has concerns about that. But one of my concerns, and I've done a podcast or two about this, is how do you capitalize on it? It's I believe Don Garber has said the World Cup is going to be like rocket fuel for the game in this country. But capitalize, I think, means different things in different places, if that makes sense. Capitalizing on Memphis, for example, will look different than capitalizing on it in, say, Atlanta or Philadelphia or someplace that's got World Cup games. and I guess it's kind of a nebulous phrase, capitalized. Like, what does it look like? To me, eventually, it means more butts in seats, more players playing at the youth level, and more eyeballs on TV. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, I mean, there's a number of ways to look at it, but I think the whole the stadiums obviously for the World Cup itself. We don't have to worry about packing stadiums and all that stuff. Obviously, people are going to go.
Yeah.
They went in 1994, and 99% of the people, you would walk 3 blocks away from the stadium, and people didn't know that the World Cup was going on.
And that was going to be one of my questions. I don't think that will be an issue this time. We all hear about how amazing the World Cup in '94 was, and it's still to this day the most attended World Cup ever by a wide margin. But those are always kind of the stories, is that the crowds were big, but there wasn't any real larger cultural awareness. I don't think that'll be a problem this time, what with social media and a more soccer savvy American sporting public. But I guess what I'm trying to get at is, how do we sustain that, right? Like post World Cup. Obviously, I think there's going to be a general uptick in all of those things, like attendance and TV viewers and kids playing, just because it's a World Cup at home. But how do we go about making sure it doesn't peter out, a year later?
Yeah, and that's the difficult part, because as by the way, I still have people come up to me and say, "Hey, I saw you play in the 1994 World Cup." Obviously, very old people, and some of them were 12 at the time. So I have people come up to me and say, "Hey, I was 12 years old. That was the first event." So 1994 World Cup had a big effect on a lot of people, but and in particular for the country, because we were able to start MLS after that. Don't forget that in 1994 MLS didn't exist yet, so we didn't have a league in this country, and the World Cup provided, I think, the beginning of the funds, to get that going. So that was huge. Now, the game has developed tremendously since, right? So now we have MLS. There's 30 teams in MLS. Almost every one of those teams has their own stadium. Almost all the stadiums are packed most of the time. Every one of the teams has youth development. They have great facilities. Kids are developing in the sport. But I'll tell you this, you can still go 4 or 5 blocks away from any club and people don't know anything about soccer. That hasn't changed much. And so for everything that we've done on the field, I don't think that off the field it has matched what has happened on the field and the investment that people have put into the game. That part for me is really disappointing, because my biggest hope for 2026 was that, if you were to go back for me in 1994 and you told me all these things are going to happen and we're going to be here today, I would think in 2026, I'd want to be fighting with the NFL for the top sport in the country. And I think 2026 will go by, and I still don't think we'll be one of the top 4 or 5 sports in this country. And that's going to continue. And that for me is disappointing.
And one of the things that I think might help, it's going to take a number of decades of Herculean efforts to, I think, surpass the NFL. And that might be a different discussion for a different day. But one thing that I think probably helped, that maybe a lot of people don't realize, is in the 90s, you had the 94 World Cup here, but you also had the Olympics in 96. And then you had the Women's World Cup in 99. And if you want to fast forward to today, I think what's going to help is that you had Copa America in 2024, Club World Cup plus the Gold Cup in 2025, World Cup in 26, and then the Olympics in LA in 2028. And I think one of the things that, I think one of the things is that, is if you can find a way to put high-level soccer in front of the American public, they'll watch it. That's one of the problems with soccer now, is you got to go find it. And if it's in front of you, they're going to watch it. So if you've got all these high-level events back to back to back to back, I think that's going to help tremendously. But again, we come back to, how do you sustain it once you get past that? But I do think just the sheer number of high-level games is going to be a huge benefit.
No, I agree with you on that. There's no question that the more soccer we have, the more people will know and understand it. I think the other fight that we have now that we likely didn't expect 20, 30 years ago is that, if you went to a youth soccer field on a Sunday, and I know you do some refereeing, right? So you
18
go on the
years.
field, you go on a field on a Sunday, and it's more likely, let's say, if you did it 3 months ago, it's more likely that if you ask the kids what game you saw yesterday on Saturday, very few of them will tell you that they saw an MLS game. But if somebody saw games, they will likely have seen an EPL game the day before. And the EPL has developed a little bit of a Saturday morning culture in this country that we didn't expect. And I think it's great for the game, by the way, because I love it. I do it myself. I watch the games. But I think it takes away a little bit from what MLS can deliver later, which, by the way, as you said, you have to go find that game. It's not easy to find. And the EPL will be just on regular TV, whether it's on TNT or whether it's on NBC, you will get to see at least one game. So that is a fight that we probably didn't expect.
Well, and it's, I mean, I know a lot of people in the world that is my regular 8 to 5 Monday to Friday job. I know several people that love watching the Premier League every Saturday morning, but here in Memphis had no idea that we had a team. Right. And I want to be frustrated because I wanted the team that was here to do well, but I can't get mad at somebody who had never watched soccer before for watching the Premier League. I mean, the more soccer people, the better, in my opinion. But I think one thing that would help tremendously is if more people had the ability to go see a U.S. national team game. And what I mean by that is, and this is something that I have been yelling and screaming into the ether to no avail for probably 5 or 6 years now, is we just got done watching the U.S. play another game in Orlando. I think they've had 8 of those in the last 6 years. Yep. How many times have they've already played in St. Louis 3 times in the last year. They played Austin, Texas 5 times since that stadium opened. So I feel like, especially if you're trying to get a ton of people excited for a home World Cup, you can and probably should take the national team to places that you either haven't been in a long time or have never been before. And I understand there's concern about field, turf versus grass or the width of the stadium or, things like that. And my position is, for this short window, I think you might do okay to just throw that out the window because the long-term benefits would far outweigh the short-term concerns. I know in a recent interview, I think JT Batson at US Soccer said what they're going to try to figure out how to do is make every game a huge event, which I feel like had been a thing for a minute, like during World Cup qualifying in 2013. I seem to remember there being like pep rallies the night before games that US Soccer put on. And I mean, the crowds were huge. The crowds were great for those games. The TV ratings were good.
We played in Jacksonville and it was packed, like just pulling into the stadium and, right before the World Cup 2014.
I was at that game.
It was huge. There was so many people everywhere we went. Yeah.
And so that's just something that I think, especially now that you have a lot of teams in leagues like the USL Championship that are getting their own stadiums. I'll give you an example. The U.S. women's team just played a game at Lynn Family Stadium in Louisville, Kentucky. And and understandably, that's a smaller stadium, so you don't want to, miss out on all those extra people. But I don't think there's any reason why, for example, a January camp game couldn't be there, because that would be a full house of 13,000 people for a game where in Orlando this past week you got 13,000 people anyway.
Yeah, I mean, it's I'm outside of that world figuring out where people go, but I understand your point that, you got to get the national team out there a little bit more, and promote it. But I'm sure they have people working, trying to figure out, the best places to be. At the end, we all have the same goal, right? That the national team does great and that everybody goes to the games. So hopefully they can make that happen.
Well, I've got my fingers crossed, but I don't know that I'm holding my breath. So we'll I guess we'll see. And then maybe the last bullet point, this has kind of turned into a pet project of mine, is that do you think that college soccer, and for all of its flaws as in terms of like trying to use it as player development, it's got its place in terms of player development, but I don't know that very many people are going to be too successful trying to build a national team out of college soccer players. But where I'm going with this is that I think college soccer is the perfect vehicle to get people who aren't interested in soccer into watching soccer. And my line of thinking is that the rules are a little bit different, so it's less of a shock to the American sporting fan, whereas the clock will count down rather than up. Substituted players can re-enter, that sort of thing. But primarily, it's a brand that you're already familiar with as a fan of that particular school. Be it the University of Memphis or Alabama or Rutgers up there in New Jersey or University of Florida or UCLA or whoever. And there are some programs out there that do draw very well for college soccer. Do you think that is something that perhaps can be explored and promoted in a way that would help the overall growth of the game?
I think a bigger plan needs to be developed. So when I was youth technical director at U.S. Soccer, we put together a tournament. And I don't know if you know about it, but we put together a tournament it was mostly ACC teams. I think we brought in Georgetown as well, and we had, you know how in college soccer they only get, I think it's 5 or 6 games in the spring to play. Like they have 5 or 6 days when they can play, and we convinced those schools. It was mostly, UNC, Duke, Wake Forest, I think we brought in Georgetown, Clemson, a lot of the bigger schools. And we convinced them to use those dates for a league we were putting together under FIFA rules.
Okay.
And so we were already doing that, trying to connect it. My hope was that we started with a league in the East and that then we would develop other leagues throughout the country. So it would be a good way for us to connect college soccer to the FIFA game. So like in the fall, they would play under their rules, but in the spring, they would use those dates to get into their little tournaments under FIFA rules. And we would send referees to them and we would run it with our referees. So it was the beginning of something, but then that was towards the end of when I left. And then I don't think that was continued at all at U.S. Soccer. But to answer your question, because I know this goes too long, but to answer your question is, I do feel like there's a place for soccer. Unfortunately, I think, it's college soccer on the men's side could have been, I think, huge. But, a lot of the bigger conferences don't even have men's soccer because of Title IX. Because you can only have so many men's. So it really, I feel like that has set back the men's programs. And, unfortunately, soccer suffered because it's not a revenue sport. So soccer, men's soccer suffered because of it. But I do feel because of the facilities that all the colleges have and the fan base that they already have, it could be a good vehicle for people to come into the game.
And to your point, that is something that, I still, one of the things that every time there's a big tournament, World Cup, Copa America, whatever, people will come up to me because they know I'm a soccer guy and say, well, who should I cheer for? And, I would always recommend, hey, you're in the U.S., support the U.S. That would be my first. But if you're looking for something different, are you a Tennessee Volunteers fan? Yeah, well, go support their program. And it surprised me when I looked, because when it comes to collegiate athletics, the Southeastern Conference has more money than anybody could spend in a dozen lifetimes and facilities beyond everybody's wildest dreams, but they don't have men's soccer programs. And what I have kind of discovered was what you said, is that it is a Title IX issue with the number of scholarship athletes required and that sort of thing. I was interested to learn that there are 2 SEC programs that do have men's soccer. They just compete in a different conference. I think it's South Carolina and Kentucky. And I do know, I looked it up, just I was fiddling around, and the Clemson, South Carolina men's soccer game last year drew, I want to say, 7,000 people, which, I mean, that's a big rivalry game. And again, that's a way that you could sell the game to look. if you're a Clemson fan, you don't need any reason to not like South Carolina. So,
Right.
we're playing them. Go support them. But that's just where my thinking takes me. I know. I mean, it's going to be the next couple of years are going to be a blast. I just hope that they're able to find some sort of way to sustain it and elevate the game as a whole. And what that looks like, I don't know. There's the old saying, soccer is the sport of the future, and it always will be. Which again, it's a little bit more true than we would all like to admit, I think. But this is, as far as what soccer making it looks like is up for debate. But at the end of the day, after all these high level tournaments, if we get more butts in seats and more eyeballs on TV and more kids playing, I think it will have been something of a success.
No doubt. I think we will. There's no doubt that after this World Cup, we will have a lot of new fans. And that'll be a positive regardless of where the sport ranks. We just have to keep working on it. It may be, like you said, that never-ending process of soccer trying to get there, but we're also not in a bad place.
No.
There's a bunch of leagues. There's a lot of people playing. There's a lot of fans watching it. There's a lot of fans going to the game. A lot of families enjoying the sport. And at the end of the day, that's what it's all about.
I think that's I'm all out of notes on stuff to discuss. Unless there's anything else that you wanted to finish off with.
No, I would just say, listen, just keep positive. Hopefully there'll be a team coming to Memphis over the next few years, and when that happens, I'll be back on the show and we'll talk about it.
Oh, I like the sound of that. I'm gonna hold you to that now.
All right.
Tab, thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate it. Hopefully everything works out as far as soccer in Memphis and soccer in this country. Thanks everybody for tuning in. That is going to do it for us tonight. Again, this is the 901 Soccer Podcast here on Bluff City Media.